Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Today, I'm going to be reckoning with my privilege as a small fat person. I want to go ahead and read this article about it and what I should know and all these different things. I would say right off the bat, being a small fat is kind of weird because I think if we look at like quote unquote privilege within fatness, I would say the group that has the lowest amount would be a mid fat, which is somebody who's around 3x, that range. I noticed a marked difference, or market, whatever. I noticed a huge difference both on being like a 4x or bigger and being a 2x and smaller than that. That range, it's going to be a little different for everybody, but the mid-fat curse is very real. That's true. And I think it's because you're big to the point where people no longer can they don't have that heuristic, I guess, that mental category to put you in. So you're just kind of there. So people just ignore you, or that you're a lot less visible, or there's just a lot more of an issue in that category where you're invisible. People just don't consider you at all. When I was there in the summer of 2023, I literally would walk in public and everything and nobody would speak to me for weeks. It was crazy. There were moments where I was literally like a ghost behind somebody. I called that the eye of the duff. That's what I called it. But anyways, basically, I do think as a small fat, I do have visibility again. That did occur this summer. I noticed it. It was a huge difference. It came back roaring. But when you're small fat, you have a lot less health issues than when you're super fat or mid fat. You have less social barriers. You have less physical barriers. So there's more you can sit at a restaurant and you don't have to worry about where. You can go to a theater, right? There's a lot less limits upon being a small fat on you. And I would say that could be somewhat privileged, I guess. But I would say that honestly, it's just that you're reaching you're like a more mainstream size. And with that comes certain benefits, like you can fit into a theater seat, for example, or you don't have to worry about breaking furniture when you sit on it. And those kinds of things. However, you're kind of in the middle of the spectrum, and I'm not midsize. I'm not there. I'll let you guys know when I'm there. I'm not. I'm small fat. But still, being small fat, it's kind of like you're right in the center of this conversation. You're right in the center of this. You're not thin. You're not super huge. So you're just there. And people all across the aisle, all across the ways, they have an opinion about you. I think that there's kind of more judgment at this size, but I would still say more social prominence or visibility, which is still kind of better, honestly. But what you have is you have thinner people who are like, you're fat. And then you have fatter people who are like, you're not that big. You can't speak on these issues. And then you have, it's like you're kind of between two worlds. I don't know how else to describe it. It's very amphibious. It's an amphibian moment in my journey where it's bizarre because I can relate to both things, like both sides, and at the same time I also can't. And things become a lot less predictable. Like some people are a lot more judgmental of a small fat and some people are a lot less judgmental of a small fat. Some people are not honest how they feel about it. Some people are brutally honest about how they feel about it, right? It's like you don't exactly know what you're going to get at this size. So I would say it's definitely harder socially, but it's still better than being completely invisible, in my opinion. Or the freak show aspect. I know that's very harsh, but that freak show aspect of being a super fat, where there's that spotlight on you, people feel sorry for you, or people hate you when you're super fat. So being in that small fat, it's like you're one of us, but you're also not. It's like you're at the table, but we're going to talk about how horrible fat people are, basically. It's like a weird type of place to be. It's just weird. It's fine. I'm good with it, I guess. You know, I don't personally love being in between things, but that's how I would describe it. It's like you're at the table, but you're still not quite there, basically. That's the way that I would describe it. It's better. It is. But it's unpredictable. And I think for a lot of people who are really, really big, people who struggle with toxic ritualistic mindsets and all these different things, this phase could be very challenging for them because it can feel very out of control and overwhelming. And I have felt those things as a small fat. But let's go ahead and do the article. Let's read it. That was my little statement on how I feel about it. Let's see what she says. So this ad is really annoying and it's blocking it, but she just said, I almost ruined the beach trip vibes with my closest friends. That's all it said after the topic of shopping came up. Okay. A girlfriend of mine lamented about how hard it can be to find jeans that fit because of her smaller waist and bigger butt. She's thin. My other girlfriend who was in this conversation is thin. I was the only person on this trip above a size small. And that one offhand remark was all it took for me to see red. But have you ever walked into a store and been too big to even try on a pair of jeans? I asked, so obviously bitter. Ooh, first world problems. That's all I can say to that one. She said, no, but I didn't let her finish. I repeated the question until she bowed out with a final dejected, no. And we all silently agreed it was time to change the subject. What I'm going to say is probably going to piss some people off right now. That's why I have the witch hat on. When you're a small fat, it is not that hard to lose the weight. It really isn't. You likely do not have these horrific issues at that size. If you never got beyond that, you likely don't have severe toxic ritualistic behaviors. You likely don't have severe hormonal issues or dysfunction. You likely do not have these things. So losing the weight really, for most people as a small fat, it comes from counting the calories, going to the gym, and that's about it. And it would probably come off in a relatively straight line. Yes, for women, you have a cycle, but it's very predictable for the most part, unless if you have issues. And you could still track the weight loss and it would be pretty linear in the sense of it's pretty simple. Most people that are small fat, they're in a quite simple calories in versus calories out paradigm. And this is why when we talk about fatness from larger perspectives, it isn't quite that simple. And it's difficult for people to understand that unless if you have been that big. And I've been that big, and now I've gotten to a small fat, and I see it is very calories in, calories out. The hormonal issues are so much better. It's not anywhere near as difficult as it used to be, period. And so I think you have to consider that it is a different experience of obesity. Also, there are going to be more complicated problems in supermorbid obesity and being super fat. But being small fat, it's not. So for me, when I hear her say this, because I do delineate it, I do see it differently in my mind. When I hear her bitching about a pair of jeans that she can't fit in, my question is, if it bothers you that much, why don't you just lose the weight? Because it really is not that hard for you. That's what I would ask. When somebody's super morbidly obese, it's a very different issue. It's usually health issues, very scary situations, health scares. It usually has severe toxic ritualistic behaviors, the letter E followed by the letter D. There can be straight up delusion, mental health issues, absolute self-hatred, right? A lot of stuff can be going on mentally and physically. You could have severe hypothyroidism, uncontrolled PCOS, diabetes, right? Like just a lot of stuff that will make losing weight harder. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something that does need to be recognized. It's still not an excuse. It just means it's going to be more difficult. It will be more of a fight during that time. But it gets easier as you get healthier. And so for me, when I see her mad, I'm just like, why don't you just drop a few pounds then, if it bothers you so much? And I think that that would probably piss her off if I asked her that. Anyways. Okay. 6 years later, I think about that conversation often and wince at myself, not for calling out that friend for what I still think were rather tone-deaf complaints to make a plus-size person, okay, but for the way I lashed out because I wasn't able to calmly verbalize what truly upset me, her failure to recognize and be grateful for her thin privilege. Oh my gosh. Let's read that again. 6 years later, I think about that conversation often and wince at myself. Not for calling out that friend for what I still think were rather tone-deaf complaints to make to a plus-size person. Okay, now I read it right. But for the way I lashed out because I wasn't able to calmly verbalize what truly upset me. Her failure to recognize and be grateful for her thin privilege. Anyone who is bigger than most of their friends knows these types of complaints well. Sometimes we are automatically designated safe people to whom one can voice shame about their own body. We hear complaints of feeling fat, or not having anything to wear, or having to stick to a specific diet and fitness regime to stay in shape. Fewer things set me off quicker than hearing these things from the mouth of someone who hasn't lived any part of their life over a size 8. But here's the thing. I'm a hypocrite. I'm having such a hard time with this already. First and foremost, if you struggle with this, if you struggle with toxic ritualistic behavior, which, by the way, I am considering and working on a video of how to break out of that. Okay, it is in concept. But this is another thing we need to discuss. Stop comparing so much. Stop making things a competition. You know, I will sometimes jokingly make things a competition within my weight loss, but it is jokingly. It's not serious. It's not like, oh my gosh, like I don't actually act like I'm on The Biggest Loser. It's just like joking, funny, lighthearted conversation. It's a way for me to kind of make fun of that aspect of myself that was that way when I had toxic ritualistic behaviors. But when it comes down to it, don't compare so much. Somebody's body size is a totally different category from you. It's totally different. I need you to separate it completely from your mind. If somebody is fat, if somebody's thin, in reality, it has nothing to do with if you're fat or thin. It has nothing to do with you. It just doesn't. It just doesn't. You know, if it has to do with health concerns, or if it has to do with like romantic dating or these kinds of things, maybe in that regard it could be. But in terms of like societal or social status and size, it has nothing to do with you. And you need to not internalize those messages, because those messages are very toxic. And even if thin people also have those mindsets, it doesn't mean that you should, because they're never going to serve you. It's a toxic competition that's never going to actually be won. Because if you go into it with that mindset, even after you lose the weight, you're going to be somebody who's constantly bitching about, oh, I'm treated so much better now. I don't want to be that way. I'll be happy, I guess. But I also recognize that I'm making changes as I lose the weight. I'm not the same in how I treat other people for various reasons. Some of it just has to do with getting older and being more mature. Some of it has to do with being healthier and being able to read situations much better and not think in a black and white way. And some of it has to do with letting go of the toxic ritualistic past completely and not internalizing these things seriously, getting to a place where I can joke about it or not make a big deal about it or whatever. Which, spoiler alert, that is going to be something in How to Get Over It. So a little spoiler for you. You need to make fun of it. Okay? Because it's ridiculous. It is. But anyways, let's continue. Anyone who is bigger than most of their friends knows these. So look at the comparison. This person is still comparing all the time. Anyone who is bigger than most of their friends knows these types of complaints well. Oh, I already read that. But here's the thing. I'm a hypocrite. If you've read this column before, you already know I fluctuated between sizes 12 and 16 my entire adult life. I'm much taller than the average woman, and I usually weigh anywhere between 200 and 215 pounds. I was a chubby kid too, one whose weight was of constant discussion in my household. I'm no stranger to being publicly body shamed or being excluded from clothing retailers or developing complicated relationships with food and fitness. I've made a career in part from making content in which I try to heal from that and help others do the same. Okay. So I would say a 12 to 16, it's being very generous. I love that she's lumping in small fats with her mid-fat thing. It's interesting. Very, very interesting. I'll just put it to you that way. Because to me, I don't know a lot about women's sizes, but I would consider that to be probably more mid-size. Maybe 16 is small fat. Maybe. But 12, I think, would definitely be mid-size. I really need to study women's sizing more, especially because I talk about this stuff. So if you guys want to let me know, I will read it, period. Okay? I would love your perspectives on that. Okay. 200 and 215 pounds. I don't know how tall she is, but I guess a little chunk maybe. Okay. But in the past, I've also called clothing brands that only serve up to size 3X inclusive. I've also called clothing brands that only serve up to size 3X inclusive in conversations with people who wear a 4X and above. I've ranted endlessly to the same people about society's lack of plus size representation when I can name plenty of well-known models and actors my size. I've recalled being teased about my weight in childhood to the face of a friend who still gets harassed in the street with strangers tossing terms like heifer at her as an insult. No such thing has ever happened to me. We're the smallest people on the fat spectrum and are therefore first in line for the revolution. Oh my God. This is so ridiculous. So, what does this mean? First in line for the revolution. Meaning what? Meaning you take the fall, meaning you kiss the ass of fatter people, meaning you take the most criticism. When I told you guys in the beginning of this video, small fat are probably most vulnerable to criticism because you can get it from everybody. You're already there and you're visible. You're not invisible. So you don't have that protection. So they want someone like me to be put first in the line of fire. That's what I'm hearing. Somebody who's vulnerable to this especially. They want to put somebody who's especially vulnerable to being bullied, harassed, talk shit to, etc. for their weight because people don't feel as bad for a small fat person. So they feel like it's okay to do those things. That's what they feel like. So they want small fat people who are vulnerable to this to be attacked for them. That's basically what that is. It's horrible. Everything in fat acceptance is completely unfair. I just want to point that out. It is a horrible movement. Everything is unfair. Everything is upside down. Everything is crazy. And these people, I swear, they are the most unempathetic. They are the most cold-hearted, calculated, competitive types of people. I swear. Like, I've gotten into, not arguments or anything, but disagreements, like with Not David, because he says that, well, they're just trying to do good things. I don't think they're trying to do good things. I really don't. As somebody who's been that huge, as somebody who has struggled with health issues to that level and been told that I should be happy about being that big, that it's beautiful and wonderful and all this crap, as somebody who is now in the first in the line of fire for the supposed revolution that I want no part of, as somebody who was the duff as a mid-fat, somebody who is completely invisible. How is that good? How is that beautiful? How is that wonderful? It's not. None of those things are good. And it's like they want you in those areas because they create this hierarchy within it so they can control. And they want the biggest people at the top so they can basically have those invisible mid-fats live through them vicariously. And then they want people like me now, I'm in the small fat era, they want people that are small fats to be basically attacked for them and go on the attack. It's just not fair. So even if you don't have the health issues, they want you to have more social problems when you're already socially vulnerable in that position. It's evil. I think that these people are not well-intentioned. I have said that many times. I still feel that way. The more I go through it, the more I look at it, I don't think it's good intentions. I don't. I think there are some people who are followers of it that might, but people who are leaders, they don't have good intentions. I don't care what they say. They don't. Because it's so unfair. Everything they do is unfair, and it's almost always the exact wrong opinion, the exact wrong thing. When you observe the internet's mid-size, sizes 10 to 14, and small fat sizes 14 to 18 communities with this in mind, it becomes apparent that many of us share at least some lack of awareness of our own privileges. This is to assume that nobody has ever lost weight and nobody ever gains weight. Most people that are fat have fluctuated through many different phases. They've gone up and down. We talk about that. It has to do with toxic ritualistic behavior in those cases. But most people have fluctuated many times throughout their fatness. Most people have lost weight and put it back on. Most people have done that. They will say that in one side of their mouth, but then on the other side of their mouth, they're like, well, we just don't know because we've never been there, because people don't actually lose weight. It's so frustrating. When you search the term midsize on TikTok, you'll find a healthy smattering of people simply showing off their outfit and using the tag. It seems just to reach other people with similar body types, totally fair. But amid that, you'll also find videos of people using the label as an attempt to victimize themselves, whether they seem to be aware of that or not. You might stumble upon a video of a thinner-looking person pushing their stomach out or burying their roll-less bikini body in what they seem to believe is a grander moment of bravery and solidarity. You might even find someone posing or dancing in a flirtatious manner under the guise of showing what real bodies look like. You'll find the comment sections of these videos almost always lean positive. Somebody who's midsize is not fat, by definition. So again, why are you lumping in a small fat person with that? It's stupid to me. I'm just going to say that. Super stupid. And I know that I'm kind of talking on their level right now, but it's frustrating me. And I think it's fine to be talking about being midsize. I mean, you can talk about whatever the hell you want. You know what I'm saying? But when I'm reading this, it comes across as super tone deaf because I am small fat. I wouldn't, I don't wear a bikini, obviously, but I do have a roll. I do have a stomach still. I do have these things. So what are you talking about? When people on the larger size of the fat spectrum, often referred to in the fat positivity community as super fat or infinite fat, post the same type of content, however, the response is generally much different. As we've previously reported in the learning curve, fat content creators, whether they're making content that's practical, comical, or sexual in nature, can be met with content bans or restrictions, harassment, content theft, and more. That said, the ability to even pose in a bikini online without it becoming a thing is a privilege, one that mid-size and small fat people, myself included, are prone to glossing over, like the many other privileges we often take for granted. That is one of the stupidest, quote-unquote, privileges I've ever heard in my life. Very stupid, very shallow, very vapid. So let's see. What are those privileges? Well, I've already alluded to some of them, such as seeing ourselves represented more in TV and movies, on runways, and even in advertising campaigns. Those of us size 14 and below are also much more widely catered to in fashion retail. That's because there's more of a majority around that size. Though both of those things might not have been true for us as recently as a decade ago, industries have shifted to appear more size inclusive. And we are lucky ones who get to reap the benefits from it. We're the smallest people on the fat spectrum and are therefore the first in line for the revolution. But being able to shop for clothes only scratches the surface. Okay, so she's basically saying here that you get the benefits of the revolution, quote unquote. Which I already said isn't true anyways. But whatever. I took it as we want mid-size and small fat people to take the heat. That's how I took it. But being able to shop for clothes only scratches the surface. Yeah, because it's really freaking shallow and vapid. Banning weight discrimination in the workplace has only become a priority for certain lawmakers within the past few years. It's still legal in most states, and larger fat people are subsequently at higher risk of being fired without reason. In the medical field, they are more likely to be misdiagnosed or even refuse care due to their weight. Discrimination can also prevent fat people from securing scholarships, receiving bank loans, and even buying a home. Hell, even the ability to sit comfortably or at all on public transportation or on a commercial airplane flight is yet another right that smaller people are handed and fat people must actively fight for. Okay. Ooh, I don't know how to say this. Wanting people to cater to you is not a right. A right is something that you have the right to do. If you want to create a bigger seat to sit in, if you want to purchase a bigger seat to sit in, that would be a right. If you cut off the ability to do that, that would be losing a right. Forcing somebody else to change their business or to change something, that's not necessarily a right. That's different. That's more of, it's something totally different. That's all I can say. Because I don't think they realize that people are the ones that changed. The seats didn't change. And they'll say, oh, well, there was an inch less on the plane and da-da-da. How many more inches are on you, though? How many more inches are on a very fat person? And I have to say that. It gets brutal here, but it's like, come on. Like, I understand that it's a part of toxic ritualistic mindsets to completely ignore the elephant in the room and what's incredibly obvious and right in front of you. But I don't have to cater to that. And I'm not going to, because it isn't good for you and it's not good for me to cater to it. If you're at 400 pounds and you're struggling to fit on a plane, you may be the problem. It's not that your right is being taken away from you. It's that you're kind of taking your own opportunities away from yourself because of what you're doing. That's what it is. And people don't want to hear that. Again, there's this obsession with the lack of responsibility in terms of supermorbid obesity. I'm not going to listen to it. I think it's not helpful. Even if it's difficult to get out, even if it takes years to get out, you can get out. And you should get out, because it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing to deal with. And although you have a right to be that size, it's not a good thing to be that size. And there are certain consequences. And you don't get to force everybody else to shield you from every consequence of choosing to be that size. That's what it is. Okay. As far as the other stuff, I already talk about the medical stuff all the time. A lot of people have issues in the medical field. They have issues with the medical system. Discrimination can also prevent fat people from securing scholarships, receiving bank loans, or even buying a home. Oh gosh, it's like huge citation needed. It's very difficult to prove. As somebody who has been hugely fat, I can understand, like, being that big, it does change your ability to work, for example. So I don't know how they're measuring this, if it's just they're doing it flat out based on discrimination, or if they're doing it based on like, oh, well, fat people make less money on average or something like that. If it was more so the fat people make less money, therefore it's harder to get a bank loan or things like that, I would say that has more to do with not being able to work as much or as sustainably. If it comes down to just flat out discrimination, I don't think that that's a good thing, obviously. Put it to you that way. But I know academically, being super morbidly obese, it did really harm my ability to do academics too. Which again, we're programmed in society to, even though we're constantly comparing everybody's size to ours, we're also programmed to ignore fatness affecting any other aspect of your life. It's just how people see you. That's all. And that's not true. Being super fat, it affects how other people see you, sure. It also affects your health. It affects your career. It affects your academics. It affects your personality. It affects your ability to make a relationship work. It affects every single thing in your life. Your ability to have a healthy marriage, your ability to be a good parent. All these things are affected by being super morbidly obese, and they don't want to address it because that's fat phobic to point out. It is a massive health issue. It is preventable. It is curable. I don't care what it takes. There will be people who are like, well, I have lipedema, or I have PCOS, or I have this, or I have that. There are treatments. There are steps to take. There are things to do. I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy, but I'm going to say that it's worth it. You have to make the most with what you've got, and you've got to do it. Or, I guess, deal with the consequences. I guess. It wasn't easy for me. It wasn't. It became easy. It's becoming easier. But it wasn't. I still did it. Are people awful about it? Yeah, they are. Are people, they want you to lose 200 pounds in a year? Yeah, it's ridiculous. Do people, try to tell you what to do or give you massively conflicting advice and do all these things? Yes. Do people try to convince you you shouldn't? Yes. Do men try to tell you you won't look as good if you lose the weight? Yes. Do men treat you differently when you do? Yes. It's difficult. I'm not going to sit here and be like, "Oh yeah, this is so easy." No, it's not. It isn't. But I can tell you, choosing to stay that way versus getting out, it's a struggle to stay that way too. And you really have to understand it is a lateral move you're working with, because your health timeline being super morbidly obese, it's so much less time and it's getting steadily worse. So while it can be so difficult to get out, while it can be painful to get out, it's just as painful to stay. It is just as painful to stay. And I will always point that out because it's true. Anyways, mid-fat and small-fat people have the luxury of not having to think about these things on a daily basis, if ever. But when you take the realities of large fat and super fat people's lives into account, posing in a size 10 to 14 bikini on the internet comes off as less brave and more, well, totally unremarkable. That can be a really hard reality to accept when you are a size 10 to 14. It's obvious, to me at least, why that is. Even though we mid-size and small fat people are not subject to weight discrimination in the same way people on the bigger side of the fat spectrum are, we're still steeped in a world that tells us our bodies determine our value and that skinny bodies, ones that still don't look anything like ours, are better. Some of us have had those harrowing dressing room experiences in which nothing fit. Some of us have been bullied about our bodies relentlessly. Some of us have had our weight policed by loved ones behind closed doors. Mid-size and small fat people, it's time to accept that we might not be doing enough. It's such interesting language, isn't it? When those memories get dredged up, we're put right back in fight or flight mode, and we go into our vision of self-defense, standing behind our victimhood like it's a shield. Just as I did during that conversation with my thin friend on the beach trip, it's easier to play victim in those moments than to foster a thoughtful conversation about why we all have to be so sensitive about our bodies to begin with. When negative emotions are regurgitated and things start to feel personal, it's even easier for smaller people to forget that the reason in question is good old-fashioned fat phobia, which many of us continually let slide when we aren't its obvious target. I don't even know what she's trying to do here. Is she trying to guilt me? Is she trying to tug at a heartstring? Like, what is she trying to do? But all I can say is it's falling on deaf ears. Very much so. I must be totally deaf because I'm like, I don't know. I think too, like the further I get out of this toxic mindset, this toxic ritualistic mindset, I'm starting to, it's like there are some things I'm forgetting. Because for me at this point, I don't understand what is such a big deal about going in a dressing room and nothing fitting. It's like I'm forgetting that. And I used to feel that so much. Like you don't even know. I've cried about it before. And now I'm just like, oh gosh, like who cares, you know? It's crazy. It's like a whole other language. It's like a CULT. It's a lot. It's a lot, you guys. And you got to get out of this. Like, I'm telling you, I will keep saying it too. Like, you cannot make a relationship work when you're like this. It's so difficult because it's crazy. This mindset is crazy. And just because some other people have that or because other people may be in that, it doesn't mean that you have to. You cannot be a part of it. If somebody goes on and on and on, and I'm telling you, I see a lot of people with toxic ritualistic mindsets, and it's not like everybody has it, but it's a lot more prominent than I think is reported, because the tells are there and people do it. And because I do this work, I can see it a lot, and I see it a lot in content creators. I wonder if there is some kind of correlation there as well, between like content creators or commentators, things like that, and people that struggle with this, because I see a lot of people have it, or they say certain things. Like that Manosphere guy, like I watched more of his content, and he has so many videos where he is saying how unattractive it is when women want to eat, and why are women obsessed with dinner dates, and why are these women so obsessed with eating? It's so unattractive. Why are you trying to eat all the time? And just things like that. It's like, that's a human function. It's not a bad thing. It's not gross to eat. But people have that. And I think for my girlies and boilies out there that struggle with this stuff, we have to understand that a lot of people have these issues, and they will externalize it onto you. They will. It's a part of it. We've likely done it ourselves to other people. I've done it. I'm sure you have too. It's a part of it. It's literally a symptom. So I will always say it doesn't make somebody else have it, but it reinforces. Like when you're in this, it reinforces it. Like this article, if I was in it, if I had the toxic ritualistic mindset still, and if I was totally in it, it would be completely reinforcing my thought processes. Yes, thinner people are better, or they're this, or they're that, or yes, this is happening, and that's happening, and this is here, and yes, and we're all comparing, and yes, and this, and my body is this, and it would all be flaring up inside. And that's what this is. And it's sad. And I think on a bigger level, if I can look past the part of me that sees the evil that they're doing, I can see the disorder. And I can have empathy for that. And this woman who wrote this, she's in it. And I think it's really important that if you're struggling with this, don't let other people drag you back into it. You have to separate it. And it's so hard. I know it's hard for some of you guys. Like I say that and I feel it, and I'm like, gosh, like I know so many of you guys are like people pleasers, or you're really sweet, or you want to get along with people, and you want these types of things. And it's like, and I know how hard it is for me to tell you to separate from how other people are talking to you about this. I know how difficult it is, but you must, because it's a very toxic thing, and people want people to stay in it with them. And you have to reject that. You have to. And it can feel so mean, and it can feel so cold, and it can feel all these things, but you must be brat. Little brat, at least. You can't internalize this. Please do not internalize this stuff. Because that mindset, in those behaviors, they have to be reinforced. If you don't do it, it goes away. And this article is a reinforcement, and that's very sad. Okay. When these memories get judged up, blah, blah, blah. When you've been through some shit, you can wind up thinking in black and white, a means of validating your own experiences. You can develop a messed up trauma barometer that labels people either as victims or not victims. People's lives are easy or hard. People are fat or they're not. There's no room for nuance. Yeah, it's a part of the toxic ritualistic mindset. It's very black and white. Very, very, very black and white. And in the case of severe cases, severe hypothyroidism also makes you have black and white thinking about everything. But that's going to be, if it's hypothyroidism, it's like, I have to clean the whole house, or I just leave it and I'm just a slob. That's a black and white hypo way of thinking. Toxic ritualistic mindset is worse, in my opinion. It's the, oh, I can make this work with this guy, even though there's no way in hell I actually can, because I'm delusional. It's the, oh, I can, lose all the weight really quick and it'll just be done. And then I can get back at everybody and I can treat everyone like crap because I was treated badly and whatever. Even if you weren't even treated that badly, it doesn't matter. That's that. So they can overlap, and then it's really hard. And I've had them overlap. But anyways, sorry. I know this is getting complicated, but I got a lot to say, apparently. Okay. Maybe that's just me, though. Hence why my therapist tells me all the time that I should allow space for conflicting truths in my head. It's because you have this problem. That's why. Still, I think that might be the key for those of us in the midsize and small fat categories who can't seem to reckon with and verbalize the body-based privileges we do have. It's the exact wrong mindset. She's trying to reinforce the hierarchy. That's what she's doing. We can be called fat and not actually be fat. We can be body shamed to all hell and still not be impacted by everyday weight discrimination. Most importantly, we can feel sympathy toward ourselves for the struggles we've endured and at the same time save sympathy for other people who have had it worse. But that requires a lot of inner reflection. And if you're me, paying a mental health professional exorbitant amounts of money to emotionally heal and therefore view people with a little more complexity and empathy. I hope your therapist is helping you with your toxic ritualistic mindsets and possibly behaviors, because they're very obvious to me. So no, mid-size and small fat people, we are probably not the enlightened body positivity sages we all like to think we are, but that doesn't mean we haven't been impacted by fat phobia at all. Okay, so now this is becoming meaningless. She's not really saying anything. Everyone is impacted by fat phobia, and unfortunately, solving that won't be as simple as posting the occasional bikini photo. Challenge fat phobic rhetoric. Yeah, she wants us to be on the front lines. Challenge fat phobic rhetoric you hear in your friend groups, in your romantic life, in your workplace, and in your family. Stop buying from fashion companies that refuse to cater to fat people. Avoid describing yourself as fat if you aren't. Read up on the racist origins of fat phobia. TLDR. One day, we might be able to live in a world where our bodies aren't subject to such constant judgment, but that will never happen if we don't liberate all fat people first. Mid-size and small fat people, it's time to accept that we might not be doing enough. I rest my case. Thank you guys so much for listening to this. I will talk to you guys again later. Have a good rest of your day, night, etc. Peace.